I'm here with Francis Ludlow, who is an associate professor at the Trinity College in Dublin. His work uses deep historical and environmental evidence to show that present crises make more sense when they are seen in a long civilizational context. So my first question to you would be, looking across history, what patterns repeat most often when environmental stress turns into political or societal collapse?
Yes, okay, wow. Start with the easy one.
Warm up.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing I've learned is that history is not very easily predictive. So there's no perfect analogy or one-to-one model that can help us understand what will happen at the moment. But there certainly are some patterns, and you could say that you're seeing them now as well. But certainly, if we look at societies like Chinese dynasties, very sophisticated, powerful societies, and other societies, you start to see problems when elites start to become more insulated, I think, from the everyday lives of the people. They're more insulated from the food shocks and so on. So they sort of care less, they've less skin in the game. You can see that as a warning sign for sure. And so can the people who are living there as well, the sort of commoners. Mm-hmm. So that's a big one for me that you see. So less responsive institutions or less responsive governance, that's one that's quite on the top of my list. Mm-hmm. And that sort of links to this idea where you can see in history maladaptations, you could say. That there are ways of doing things, organizing your system, your food supply, and that suit, again, certain sectors of a society, usually the elites. Yeah. And things may work for quite a while that way, but inbuilt in them is a particular cost. You know, it could be like in medieval Ireland, there are production systems for food that they work for the elite system for many centuries, for the Gaelic elites, but they come with them, built in them a certain embedded cost, a certain vulnerability to environmental shocks. Mm-hmm. And that vulnerability usually hits the commoners, and the elites are insulated from it. So you can see once that starts to persist and become worse, they're big warning signs, I would think, historically, and repeated ones.
Okay. And do you think this pattern could be continued infinitely? That, you know, the elites keep their chairs and their comfort and their food and, you know, everything, and then the others just bye-bye?
I think that the system, all systems that I've studied at least, seem to try and limp on and just do the bare minimum in terms of change to sort of maintain the status quo. Yeah. And so yeah, you can drag things on if you're lucky, and your system is not. So you're building up a vulnerability, say, to environmental shocks. So you can be lucky and have a period where there are less of those, okay. And so you're able to coast along, extracting certain things out of the system without it being tipped over the edge. And it's, yes, you know, there's the Ptolemaic dynasty in ancient Egypt, say from 305 to 30 BC. They got lucky for quite a long time. In medieval Ireland, the system, even though there were shocks, seems to have persisted, at least for the elites. It's worked well for them. But there were mass famines reasonably regularly, mm-hmm. Usually precipitated, at least a direct cause was some sort of weather event. But really the underlying cause was the structure, the social structure, But so you can coast for quite a while. Yeah. Like we're doing now.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. However, as far as I know, dynastic Egypt or in the medieval ages, they didn't have, for instance, thermonuclear weapons. So our current situation is somewhat different from those of the past, isn't it?
Sure. Oh yeah. Like as I said, there are. I mean, also every collapse, if you even like that term, or you maybe prefer transformation or so on, but it's these transformations, if you don't call them collapse, fine, they can often be very painful. So they're not things that you would want your society to experience. If you're going to change, you want to change in a more planned and measured way. So even if you're someone, and a lot of scholars don't like the term collapse, but if they're studying something like the fall of the Roman Empire or the end of Ptolemaic Egypt or the collapse of Chinese dynasties, These are usually painful events with large demographic impacts. So they're not something you want to go into unplanned. And that's usually how they happen, of course.
Yeah.
Not that there aren't winners and losers from all of these things. There are usually some group that will come out and actually gain or lose less in a relative sense. But yeah, they're not good. And but the terminology is important, I think, in terms of how we talk about them.
And I'm aware, and I don't want you to, predict anything. I just want to, basically an idea to get this from you. So what did you learn from your studies, and what do you think when you look at our current history or recent history? Do you find some similarities which can, if not as a prediction, but maybe just a thought experiment, maybe a little bit extrapolate, which could be the most possible scenarios for us in the next 20, 30, 50 years or so?
Yeah, it's more of just it's pure speculation, and the extent to which it's informed by work on history, it's in seeing mechanisms in action, similar mechanisms, not one-to-one analogies, but you can see mechanisms in action, such as elites becoming more and more isolated or insulated, but also isolated. Having plans to abandon ship. You can see that now, bunkers being made in Australia and New Zealand, escape plans of the elites. And there are precedents for that sort of thing in history, whether it's facing different types of hazards like plague outbreaks and so on. You would flee in medieval Europe if you could to flee the cities to your second home or your third home, where your aristocratic estate. So you see these things happening now and becoming quite prominent. They make the news. They're all sort of joining up the dots, and that there are people who are aware and are taking action or making plans, and they're the people or the groups that are able to do so, and that are often implicated in the means of production and the perversion of our political systems that are driving us towards this cliff. So they're gaining from that, but at the same time they know that there's probably a need to bail out here, and they're planning for it as well.
That's so interesting, man.
Yeah.
Like this is so paradoxical, and I'm really far from understanding what could be going on in the heads of these people. But there must be some real deep hope in them that whatever happens won't be won't be fatal, at least for them. Probably.
Yeah, I don't think necessarily these people want the end of the world. Maybe I can't claim that for all of them though, but I think they think that they'll be insulated enough, and that maybe they'll even make money out of catastrophe. I think it was, I can't remember the exact name, but one of Barack Obama's aides is famous for saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. Either in a political sense, but you can also think of that in an economic sense. A lot of money was made out of COVID. There's always lots of money to be made out of disaster recovery.
Yeah.
That's a vast industry. We have the concept now, maybe just 20 years old or so, of disaster capitalism. That describes a lot of what we see now pretty well. You can make money out of it. So you can exploit these crisis situations. Of course, if you let them go too far, eventually everyone loses.
Yes.
And maybe we'll be in a situation where everyone loses in the next 50 years or so. And that there will be no outright wins to have, no outright gains to make. Yes, there will still be probably some people who will be more insulated than others, or some regions and so on, but it will be a net loss, I think.
What do you think, what could be the worst thing that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your scenario and on your disaster scenario. But for me, it would be a breakdown of global interconnectivity. It's part of the reason why we're in this mess. And now you can propagate shocks through network effects and so on. So you can have even vulnerabilities in your food supply system, where a lot of your food, your grain, is coming from one region and you didn't realize this. And now the shock propagates through potentially globally. But there's a lot that we got from our levels of interconnectivity, like this conversation. The more connected we can be, the less othering you can have of different peoples and groups, the more we understand each other. And I think as we go into a breakdown, if we really go into one, that's something that we should try and maintain, our communications with each other.
Okay.
Even if it's not so much about air travel anymore, it's that we still share knowledge. We can still help each other as much as we can. So I'd prioritize connectivity if we could, in a way. It seems a little bit paradoxical because it's been part of the problem, arguably.
Yeah.
But, I think it could be part of the solution. If we go back to really isolated communities, this is a heavy breakdown. I think that's not going to be good. It's not so much that we'll be starting from scratch, but you want to try and preserve the gains that we've had, I think, in knowledge and communication.
I think that's fantastic what you're saying. It's so important. And I don't think people realize how important it is. I mean, it's really not the first thing when we think, what do we really need?
Yeah, I mean, there are more obvious answers, and there are lots of other important things too. Preserving small communities. In a way, it's not about the choice between preserving and strengthening your local communities. That's always mattered in disasters. You find, in fact, in most disasters, including in the Western advanced world, that the first responders to a disaster situation are almost always your neighbours, not the actual professionals. They get there, obviously, but sometimes they're depending on the disaster, they're impeded in their access. So that's obviously important. So it is, community is important, local communities. But I guess what I'm trying to say with this sort of communication is that there's also a global community.
Okay.
I think if you're going to have a global breakdown, they're your first responders as well, in a way, your neighboring country maybe.
And how do you maintain global communication in a global breakdown?
I don't know. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, okay.
There are lots of proposals, for archiving of knowledge and archiving of material resources, seed vaults, and so on. And this depends what level of catastrophe we're talking about here. Yeah. But they all take money, they all take political will. It's an investment where you don't see the payoff, until who knows when. Yeah. You might never see it. Actually, if things go well, you may never see it at all because you haven't needed it. And there's this concept which I find interesting of the prevention paradox. It's when you enact measures, say in disaster resilience, and so maybe new laws and so on, and you might have trouble getting them through. There may be a cost to imposing a new regulation or a new form of stricter building codes, whatever it might be. And if those things actually are effective, then you won't have your next disaster when there's an earthquake or so on. So what happens over time is that you've prevented disasters, and so people start to think, well, do we really need this? We haven't had an earthquake disaster in X number of years. So there's a name for it now, and it's useful to be able to put names on these phenomena so that you can label them and deal with them. And it sort of gives them a sort of concrete identity. So the prevention paradox is a nice and interesting one. Well, not nice, but it's a good way to wrap that sort of paradox up in a 2-word description and then throw it around in discussions so that it becomes visible. There's cool. Many of these sort of things, Next question.
Yeah, I'm afraid
I can keep. Oh, we're out of time.
We have to wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's still 12.
I'll just keep going.
Okay. We learned so much from you. I'm really grateful for this.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, and sorry for making it so tight, but
no, it's
so much good information, and I want to get it out.
No, we can chat more. I'm sure at some stage.
Yeah. Okay.